Hello and welcome back to Whiskey Uncorked. My name is Brian, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Um, we're going to do something a little bit more podcast style, a little bit more freestyle, free form, and I'm just going to kind of try to talk about the immediate direction in terms of some videos that I think I'll be putting out here over the next week or two. Um, so I grabbed a glass of bourbon and we're going to try to get through this somewhat concisely. But really, this first part of the series is really meant to just give you a little bit of an intro as to kind of how I got here, because I think that requires some explanation. Also, being that this is one of the first videos that's going live on my channel, I think it's useful for people to kind of get a little bit of an insight into how my brain works. And also, it's helpful for me to kind of have this available or to point people to in the future in terms of my mindset, how I think about things that interest me, and just my general motivations for doing this YouTube stuff at all. So, how did we get here? I had an idea for a video series, essentially, something that I would do on a somewhat regular basis. It would be a little bit more of a deep dive type video. I figured they would be a little bit more long form content, maybe even an hour long, because I was going to take a distillery that I didn't know much about, that it seemed like maybe a lot of other people within the online whiskey community might not know a lot about, or if they do know a lot about it, it's not necessarily because they gathered that experience on their own. What am I talking about? Well, let's take Dalmore. Dalmore is a distillery that I was going to make my first version of, or first edition of this series on, because I thought it was a really great example. And I happened to be able to get my hands on a couple independent bottlings of Dalmore. So I've heard a lot about Dalmore. Dalmore is a famous whiskey brand. It's almost impossible to not know what the bottle looks like if you pay attention to whiskey at all. There's a good chance, even if you don't pay attention to whiskey, you might be able to pick out a bottle of Dalmore off of the shelf of a bar. It's in every country, I guess I can't say every country, but most countries that sell whiskey, Scotch whiskey, American whiskey, you can probably buy a bottle of Dalmore there. But I realized that the vast majority of the opinions that I have about Dalmore, if you were to ask me what my opinion is on Dalmore, those opinions weren't really mine. This was a distillery that, by watching YouTube creators talk about it, it was almost never positive, right? And there's good reason why. On paper, I totally understood it. And there was really no reason for me to say, I don't believe them. I'm going to go buy these bottles of whiskey and try them. Which is fine. I think that was okay. There's plenty of whiskey out there. It's 40% or 43% ABV. It's heavily chill filtered. It's heavily colored. And it's overpriced compared to other options in the Scotch whiskey world. Options that are higher proof and aren't chill filtered and are natural color, and just things that I'm more willing to support and things that I would expect a better experience from. But when you start a YouTube channel, you realize that maybe it's not the best idea to just be regurgitating or parroting the opinions of others. I'm going to do it at some point. Maybe I already have. But if I can over time reduce the number of occasions where that happens by trying to do my own research, gather my information, try the whiskeys myself, and try to be somewhat objective to start, that's going to go a long way in future me making good quality content that I can stand behind and that I can more readily engage in the conversations that could come up around that. So I said, let's take Dalmore as a great example, being that I was able to gather these two independent bottlings. And I went and I bought a official bottling, which I was perfectly happy to maybe never have done. I mean, maybe at some points curiosity would have got the better of me, but at least right now, definitely wasn't on the shopping list. But I thought this was a good opportunity to learn about the distillery, to learn how they became one of the more iconic Scotch distilleries globally, how they've done that, creating this luxury brand, all kind of despite the opinions of like the enthusiasts and geeks and nerds that their whiskey isn't really that good. It's not that special. It's even if it was good, they kind of ruin it. And they price it in a way that is just absurd for what you're getting in the bottle. And the story, but they're still highly successful. And reading about their history is fascinating. And I look forward to getting deeper into that history. At least a little bit. It's kind of giving you a general timeline, and like you'll see that like they made a decision to become a luxury Scotch whiskey, and in a relatively short period of time, starting in like 2002, they turned themselves into the brand they are today. They've they increased their sales like 4 times over in like a 7-year span. And their story it's interesting. It's especially if you can remove yourself from a Scotch whiskey fanatic. If you're a marketing person, like they've got to be some sort of a case study, right? What they've done in turning themselves into what they are almost overnight when you're talking about a distillery that's been open since like 1829, I believe, is crazy. And I thought if I took a objective look at what they are, what they became, what they're trying to do, what does their marketing actually say, and then subsequently take a look at the whiskey they make through at least one official bottling, and then through these independent bottlings, just trying to get a picture of what they can be. Like, what do they actually do? What kind of whiskey do they actually make? Even if I never buy another bottle of Dalmore for the rest of my life, I can at least have a little bit of a foundation for at least the near future about what they can be. Should I be mad? Like if these independent bottlings were the best whiskeys that I've ever had, I could be pretty upset at them, stripping it of all of its character and giving it to us at a lower proof. And then I could be angry. If everything was bad, then I guess no real loss, right? But they also are, as I've mentioned, one of the most iconic brands in the whiskey industry, period. So there's almost no way that Dalmore Distillery and its marketing and its public reputation and persona and the information that everyday consumers are absorbing when they walk by a bottle that's on the shelf for $300 next to other bottles that are maybe $60 and saying like, oh, wow, that must be really good. There's almost no way that doesn't trickle down into affecting the distilleries that we do expect that we do respect as enthusiasts, and that we're excited to buy, excited to try, excited to talk about. There's no way that we aren't being affected by this. And does that mean that we should maybe not ignore the distillery? Not saying we should run out and buy every bottle of whiskey they make, but maybe we should talk more about them. And maybe not necessarily cynically. I didn't know. Maybe we should be yelling from the treetops about how this needs to stop, and it's not going to. But like, because they are a highly successful business, and once you start digging into that, you kind of understand why maybe these distilleries are trying to be more like some other distilleries are trying to be more like Dalmore and Macallan. Macallan's probably the poster boy for this, but regardless, like, we should maybe talk a little bit more about some of these distilleries and not just act as if they don't exist. And then as the rabbit holes continue to kind of pop up, right, you start thinking like, who's buying this stuff? Are they happy that they bought it? Why are they buying it? And then, you have the real reflective moment. It's like, well, why do I buy the things that I buy? How do I feel about the things that I've bought? And as a brand new, whiskey YouTuber, how am I going to talk about those things? I talked about value in my Dal Ewan review and how like complex something, a concept that's pretty simple on the surface can actually be if you want to think about it like that. You don't have to, but there's always these things kind of simmering below the surface, and the ways that human beings make choices and how we feel about those choices and how we talk about those choices and defend those choices. There's, mountains of literature that, there's degrees you can earn. There are lectures that you can give, and I'm not going to try to do that. I'm not qualified there, but these are concepts that are understandable and they're relatable. Once they're kind of spelled out, you may already know of some of them. But we are all biased, and we all make purchasing decisions as well as other decisions in our life based on those biases and our desires to fit in, and a whole ton of psychology topics that go into, standing in front of the whiskey shelf trying to decide what we're going to buy. Like, it's kind of crazy to think of all these things that are kind of happening in the background. And it's not just the things we do buy, it's the things we don't buy, like Dalmore. And maybe we are biased, but maybe we're biased for good reason. We have a certain amount of information. We have all the information. Are we afraid of the information we don't have? What if it is really good? What if the marketing's right? Spoiler alert. But we talk about these things vaguely online, on YouTube in particular, right? We can talk about FOMO and we can talk about hype. And the reality is that those are things, and we can debate those things. But those are really obfuscators for much deeper concepts that I think it's really useful for us to at least kind of understand. Like, why am I making this choice? Like, it can stop impulse purchases. It can maybe stop you from buying bad things. It can maybe allow you to branch out and try something that maybe you would have skipped over because you had some information that maybe didn't paint the complete picture, and you were biased because of that. Anyway, these topics are really interesting because we all do it. It's universal. And having that opportunity to like learn a little bit more about yourself, even though that's always or can be a little scary. Um, if we're talking about needing to be more well informed and making smarter decisions because whiskey's more and more expensive every day, and we need to need to really hone in on how and why we make the decisions that we make. Um, so with all of these questions floating around in my head, I really felt the need to explore these before I could make this otherwise relatively simple video about Dalmore. And even if I was able to do that, then the next time I did a video on whatever distillery I chose, um, maybe I'm still thinking about these things. And trust me, I'm not, at the end of the day, this isn't going to result in me trying to convince you that you should have been drinking Dalmore this entire time. That's definitely not going to be the result. But it was a nice spark for me to start digging into some topics that I hadn't really considered being tied to my whiskey passion. And if we're going to keep having to have these discussions about pricing and value, et cetera, then we need to have at least a basic understanding of some of these ideas and concepts and being able to look at marketing and the things that we believe and why do we believe those? Do we really believe them? Is it because someone else told us we should? How far are we willing to maybe debunk those things? Are we perfectly comfortable with that, which is perfectly fine? Like I said, with Dalmore, I was perfectly happy, probably ignoring it going forward. But I'm happy that I did at least dive into it for these videos because I've learned a lot. And whether this video series turns out to be good or just me rambling for a couple hours, I'll probably feel better at the end. And at least it's good practice. And it's opportunity for people to give me feedback about like, hey, stop making these stupid videos and just tell me if the latest Springbank is good or whatever, which I'm perfectly happy to do. But I do like these kinds of things, and I'd be lying if I said that this wasn't going to at least be a little bit self-indulgent. But I hope maybe there's some useful information in it for you as well, and it can set the table for maybe some more interesting discussions going forward. So with that, thanks for sticking around and listening to me ramble on about these ridiculous ideas I have floating around in my head that I'm going to have to look into a little bit before I move on. Hopefully I don't spend too much time doing that, but I think this will be good. So stick around, subscribe, like I said, let me know if you think this is a good idea at all. Leave a comment. I'm more than open to feedback. So until next time, cheers.